Chapter 946. A bestowment or a curse. The ice-cold potion slid down his throat, bringing Klein numbness, one that reached deep into his soul. He had already stopped dancing. His mind seemed to be lifted as though he was high in the air, looking down at the ruined Revival Square, at Kukawa City which had been left in shambles by the repeated lightning strikes. At this moment, he felt his emotions rouse up for some baffling reason, as all the pedestrians below seemed to be connected to him by some invisible threads. They could be happy, angry or sad, making all kinds of actions based on his directions. Klein often had such feelings recently. He knew that this was the vision of a director. By viewing all participants as marionettes or actors, he attempted to control or guide them into putting on a grand performance. Using that hint of familiarity, Klein hurriedly adjusted his state of mind, completely separating his emotions from it, and viewing everything in a cold, aloof manner, so as to prevent himself from being affected by the play. As a director, he followed the script, referred to reality, and rationally made an analysis to choose according to the circumstances. He allowed emotions to build up, allowing himself to push matters forward and use the clues that had developed. Once his state of mind settled, he felt the potion's power spread across his body, like a sharp-threaded net. Suddenly, Klein felt that his soul body was connected to his physical body. They were split into countless parts, and without being able to hold it in any longer, he let out a cry from deep within his soul. No! His thoughts were diced apart, turning into fragments as they fused with different pieces of flesh as he gained his own sentience. These included Klein with pain, Klein with arrogance, Klein with coldness, Klein with gentleness, Klein who could amusement himself, as well as Zhou Ming Rue, Sherlock Moriarty, Gehrman Sparrow, and Dwayne Dantes. His entire spirit body seemed to be thrown into a grinding machine. Not far away, Leonard, whose cheeks were streaming with unconscious tears, first saw Captain Dunn, who was embracing Daily Simone, transform back into Klein Moretti. Following that, he noticed his face, neck, and the back of his hands. Pale-colored tendrils protruded out as though they had a life of their own. They kept growing outwards, turning into a transparent maggot. And beneath his clothes, there were also signs of squirming. This made Leonard have the feeling that Klein would collapse into a cluster of transparent maggots the next second as they raced in different directions. Just as he wanted to do something, he felt dizzy. He instinctively closed his eyes and didn't dare to keep watching the transparent maggots that grew out of Klein's body shimmered under the sunlight, producing three-dimensional layers of mysterious symbols. They connected to higher and lower levels, directly presenting the abstract concepts of bizarreness, madness, change, strength, and wisdom. Amidst howling cold winds, black illusory threads rose up around Klein as they bonded together, forming strange tentacles. The tentacles flailed as his soul body, astral projection, body of heart and mind, and ether body were reduced to fragments as they fused with the different maggots that represented Klein's various thoughts, turmoil, and dilemmas. As they wafted between them gently, they seemed to fly up to an infinite height where there were countless illusions hugging huge distorted buildings. They were either playing wind instruments, giving speeches, growling, or raving. Amidst Klein's countless chaotic senses, everything around him stacked together as though they turned into the spirit world. However, there were living people coming and going with the stars shining upon them. At this moment, the fragments filled with thoughts had similar memories appear, fresh memories. It was of King of Angels Adam praying with his eyes closed. It was the scene of his shocking appearance. It was him using Death Knell against Nsangwil as he pulled the trigger to blast open his head. It was when he revealed his clown smile, saying in a deep voice, "This shot is for Captain." It was when spectator Adam used an extremely clear and innocent eye to take in the ending of the performance. It was of him turning into Dunn Smith, inviting Daily Simone to dance the closing dance. They were all so fresh on his mind. Especially the gaze of a spectator. There was a seemingly corporeal feedback that felt like a magnetic force. It made Klein gradually discover his sense of self-awareness once again. Who am I? This was a question that Klein had an answer to when he was still a faceless. He didn't need to think too much about it as he quickly understood his identity. A person from Earth, a person who had been reconstructed from Klein's memory fragments, a person whose experience as a Nighthawk deeply influenced him, a person who played safe and was afraid of danger, but was able to persist and give up everything, a guardian and a miserable wretch. Strange sensory organs that didn't come from the body of heart and mind or soul body were extracted bit by bit from the fragments, condensing Klein's new thoughts. Coldness, calmness, spectating, and overlooking. They were thoughts that allowed him to view the world from even more angles and dimensions. He knew that this could possibly be godhood. Without putting up any resistance, He chained the original spirit body fragments with black threads, allowing him to slowly take form again. At this moment, he realized the purpose of the advancement ritual. It was a mark, an anchor. Compared to other pathways, the Bizarro sorcerer, who experienced the fragmentation of their soul bodies, required an anchor much earlier. However, this didn't require the support of any faith. On the contrary, faith was a numerous and jumbled affair with too many personal feelings involved. During the fragmentation during this ritual, it easily wiped away the humanity of the advancer who was only sequence 5, leaving behind godhood. A grand and profound performance under the watch of countless spectators was enough to make up this anchor. Although the spectators were few in number, as the pinnacle existence of the spectator pathway, Adam could match thousands of ordinary spectators. He could even imagine a theater of spectators to create the effect. With his entire body taking form, all kinds of knowledge surged out from the depths of his demigod spirit body, embroiling Klein's mind and giving him an indescribable impact. It felt as though his brain was about to explode. However, with some level of godhood and his rich experience, he could view this in a detached manner and rather easily pass through the stage. The transparent maggots on his face, hands, neck, and beneath his clothes returned into his body, turning back into the black-haired, brown-eyed Klein Moretti. Looking at Daily Simone, who was still in his embrace and slowly turning cold, he lifted her up and walked to Leonard Mitchell. He bent down and placed her on the ground. Daily no longer had pitch-black scales or white feathers. She had been restored to normal and her eyes were closed. The corners of her mouth were curled up like she was having the deepest and sweetest dream. Klein stood up and looked at Leonard, who had opened his eyes again and said heavily, "She has returned to the goddess's kingdom, just like Captain." He had turned her into a marionette to reverse Daily's mutation, allowing her to die like a human before releasing his control over her. Leonard tried to force a smile as he whimpered a sound of acknowledgement. Tears were streaming down his face. Klein gently nodded his head. To her, this might not be the worst outcome. She returned as a human to the embrace of a deity she believes in, and that's where Captain and the others are. As he spoke, he subconsciously and sincerely raised his right hand and tapped his chest 4 times in a clockwise fashion. Leonard instinctively drew the sign of the crimson moon. He was momentarily taken aback as his expression turned odd. Klein surveyed the area and said, "Take Ma'am Daly back with you to East Balam. Make it known that she died due to Nsangwil's attack, and had made exceptional contributions in causing Nsangwil's death. Don't worry. No one will investigate you. Of course, you can take this opportunity to leave the red gloves." I am used to the church," Leonard said heavily. Klein took off his hat and bade farewell with a bow. Holding his hat, he turned to walk to Nsangwil's body and took a card that had a chariot and a red priest on it. The red priest wore the face of Roselle Gustave. Leonard's lips quivered as he suddenly asked, "Aren't you returning to the church?" Klein didn't turn around as he wore his silk top hat and headed for another exit of the square. After a few steps, he paused and replied to Leonard with his back facing him, "I can't return any more. Can't return any more." Leonard stared in a daze as the familiar figure gradually distanced himself and vanished. After a while, a few beyonders flew to Revival Square. One of them was wearing the clergyman robes of the Church of Evernight. She had a head of beautiful raven-black hair and an exquisite face. No one could tell her age, because no one cared. They could only notice the eyes that seemed to contain countless stars within. This lady was floating in midair as she looked at the square. All she saw was Nsangwil's sorry corpse that could hardly be recognized. Covering his cracked head was a commonly seen tarot card. It was the star. Above the gray fog, Klein placed the red priest card by his left hand and closed his eyes to rest for a moment. He had a basic grasp and understanding of the powers of a Bizarro sorcerer. On the one hand, he could transform into animals that weren't too disparate in size. In a spirit body state, he could completely ignore this point. He could transfer wounds from either himself or others onto a paper figurine. He had also gained the enhancement of the flaming jump ability that now spanned nearly 1,000 meters. The might of air bullet reached that of a cannon. On the other hand, he could now obtain initial control of one's spirit body threads in 3 seconds. He could turn a target into his marionette within 15 seconds. His control range was 150 meters. At the same time, he could switch spirit body threads, allowing his marionette to obtain all his Beyonder powers. Within 1,000 meters, he could switch locations with his marionette as he wished. Due to this point, and the maggots he separated as a mythical creature form, as well as the disguise from the spirit body threads, Klein obtained a higher level of body doubles. This also meant that, as long as any one of his marionettes were alive, a Bizarro sorcerer would never die. The enemy often found it difficult to know if the one killed was the Bizarro sorcerer or his marionette. What was real and what wasn't was difficult to determine. After confirming his state and resting for a moment, Klein immediately walked deep into the mysterious space above the gray fog. He headed for the staircase of light that seemed to lead to heaven. As he expected, there was another step, one formed of light. This time, Klein believed that he could use this sixth step that resembled a giant's to step onto the condensed gray cloud. 1 step, 2 steps, 3 steps. He came to the end and, with a leap, stepped onto the cloud formed by the gray fog. Reflecting in his eyes was a door of light tainted with a bluish-black luster. It was formed from countless layers of spherical light, and each spherical light enveloped squirming maggots. Some of them were transparent, others translucent. This was the scene Klein saw through Enzo's eyes, but the objects were very blurry, as though something was obstructing his vision. In addition, above the door of light, there were thin black threads that hung down. They were hanging up what seemed like completely transparent cocoons. These cocoons were gently swaying, wrapping different souls. They looked to be of all descents: African, Asian, Caucasians, etc. Some were wearing jeans, others holding cell phones. Some had beautiful clothes, others having beautiful facial features. All of them had the aura as though they were living, but their eyes were tightly closed. Klein's gaze froze as though he had returned to Earth and had walked onto the streets which were filled with people. Then, he noticed that 3 cocoons had opened. They were empty and were swaying with the wind. Raising his head, Klein took in this sight as he observed in silence. Chapter 947. House Call Backlund, East Borough, in a 2-room apartment. A few policemen in black and white checkered uniforms opened the door and entered. All of them reached out to cover their mouths. There was a strong stench of blood inside. "Officer, I've no idea what happened." Other tenants said that it seems like there's plenty of blood here, that they can even smell it from next door. The landlord with a silk top hat looked around in fear, unwilling to stay in the room for another second. A black-haired, blue-eyed police officer with an inspector epaulette waved his hand and said, "Wait by the door. We still have questions for you." As he spoke, he wore his white gloves and cast his gaze towards the wooden door of the bedroom. However, he wasn't in a rush to enter. He slowly surveyed the area and visually took in the surroundings: a pile of coal, a cupboard with cutlery and food, a small stove, a cleanly washed iron pot, a somewhat greasy table, 2 collapsed circular stools, 2 slanted chairs, a few glass bottles with unknown powders, and a stack of scattered tarot cards. A mysticism enthusiast with an ordinary financial situation? The black-haired, blue-eyed inspector nodded gently as he made a judgment. Then, he signaled for a subordinate to open the bedroom door. With a creak, a stronger smell of blood gushed out. The constable who opened the door looked in and let out a short exclamation as he repeatedly retreated. The inspector frowned. He pressed the retreating constable's shoulders, circled around him, and approached the bedroom. When he swept his gaze, his expression immediately changed. In the bedroom, on a wooden bed, there was a man lying there. His hands were tied to the bedpost. He was naked with deep and shallow marks on his body. His blood had long been drained, dyeing the bedsheet and blanket beside him dark red. On a cursory glance, the deceased had apparently been bound by metal wire, cutting into his skin and flesh, right into his bones. This scene still affected the policeman who had seen many murder scenes. Furthermore, it had a diabolical feeling, like it was a ritual. As the inspector was about to say something, 2 people rushed into the room. One of them attempted to take photos while the other bombarded him with questions. "Another murder case? Hasn't there been many murder cases in East Borough recently? Officer, do you think it's a serial murder?" The black-haired, blue-eyed inspector frowned and waved his hand. "Do not interfere with the scene. Otherwise, we will view you as the criminal's accomplice." He then said to the constable from before, "Kaziz, please escort the 2 reporters away. Tell them that if they have any questions, ask the news department of Civilau's Yard." After the reporters were escorted out of the crime scene, the inspector let out a long sigh. "I'm going on the newspapers again. Damn it!" In Empress Borough, the opulent villa of Earl Hall. Another murder in East Borough. The victim is suspected to have been abused before being killed. Having had dinner, Audrey was in the activity room casually reading the Backland Evening News. Upon hearing his daughter's soft muttering, Earl Hall shook his head and sighed. This isn't new in Eastborough. The statistics show that there are people dying every day in there. It's far from one person. Audrey didn't pay too much attention to the matter. After a casual chat with her parents and brother, she returned to her room with her golden retriever, Susie. The human and dog could read each other's minds without any exchanging of words. The latter stood by the door as a guard while Audrey locked the door. She sat by her bed and chanted Mr. Fool's honorific name. After a few seconds, she saw a dark red beam of light surge and drown everything. Audrey arrived above the grey fog, coming inside the magnificent and ancient palace. She then saw a small room to the side. The mottled door was ajar. It's much better than the old confessional from before. However, this doesn't match Mr. World's character. Did something happen to his state of mind? In thought, Audrey entered the room and closed the mottled door. She had previously had a follow-up appointment with the World Gairman Sparrow and concluded that he had fully recovered. To her surprise, she received a request from him for another treatment. This left her puzzled as she felt a little intrigued. In the rather spacious dark room, Audrey leaned against the wall that obviously had another person behind it. Her body slowly slid down as she knelt down with her legs placed diagonally. In the calm and serene atmosphere, she adjusted her state of mind and said with a brisk tone, "Good evening, Mr. Whirl." Just as she said that, Audrey's spiritual intuition already knew the situation with his body of heart and mind, or in common parlance, his emotions or mood. Gloomy, disheartened, confused, depressed, and having no interest in anything. Mr. World's current problem is completely different from the last one. What happened this time? Audrey gently bit her lip and calmly made a judgment and used a timely placate. This was the most useful power of a psychiatrist. In ancient times, it was called psychoanalysis. The dark clouds behind the wall scattered significantly. Gammon Sparrow finally hoarsely said, "Good evening, Miss Justice." Leaning against the wall, Audrey thought and cancelled her original plan. She maintained her brisk tone and said, "I'm very curious about your recent experiences. It seems you have had too many encounters. There's no need to think about anything else. Let's have a chat first, just like we're friends. If you're interested in my life, I'm also willing to share with you some of the interesting matters." On the opposite side of the wall, Gairman Sparrow fell silent for a moment. Without answering the question, he asked, "What hopes do you have for the future?" Audrey's eyes darted slightly to the side as she replied seriously, "To advance myself, to work hard to become a demigod so as to better protect my father, mother, and brothers. Oh, I've recently visited the applicants to the Bursary Foundation with the other staff of the foundation. Their living conditions are really worse than I imagined. Although I've read some reports and was mentally prepared, I still found it unsettling when I saw it with my own eyes. A girl who's just a few years younger than me was very short and skinny. She doesn't fill her stomach daily, and she only has 2 tattered dresses. When she said that she wishes to study, her eyes were extremely pure and filled with an earnest desire. I can't forget it to this day." As she spoke, Audrey acutely sensed the change in Gairman Sparrow's mental state. It was no longer a completely still lake, and it was now rippling and undulating after a short deliberation. This psychiatrist continued as though she didn't seem to notice anything. "I once anticipated having a beautiful wedding, wishing that my prince will appear like those popular novels. However, after becoming a spectator, I realized that I might never be able to fulfill this dream. I can often read the true thoughts of those men and see through their lies. I'm able to confirm that many people aren't as nice as I imagined, and it has left me disappointed. In a few more years, I might be able to appreciate people for their flaws, but it's really difficult to do so now." Noticing that Gairman Sparrow, who had his back to her across the wall, having the emotions of laughter, Audrey did a timely placate on him. Then she heard him ask, "You once gathered information about dragons from the sun. You should have some understanding of the dragon of imagination. If I were to tell you that your father, mother, and brothers are imagined by the spectator pathway's king of angels and that they do not really exist, what would be your reaction?" "I'll definitely collapse on the spot and directly lose control. Mr. World has a psychological problem because of his discovery that the thing that he has been anticipating, his ultimate goal, will never be fulfilled." Audrey was first alarmed by Gairman Sparrow's question before she realized the essence of the question. She didn't reply as she asked in a guiding manner, "You seem to have witnessed the destruction of hope." "Heh. There was a self-deprecating scoff sounding from the wall behind Audrey. Indeed, I once thought that I had family. Later, I realized that it was only an extravagant hope of mine. Why do you say that? Audrey asked like she was having a casual chat. Gehrman Sparrow fell silent for a few seconds before saying, "Have you heard of those fairy tales that Emperor Roselle used for bringing up children?" "Those are my childhood memories," Audrey acknowledged. At the same time, she discovered that Mr. World's emotions were clearly stirred on the other side of the wall. Repressed pain was surging out. This time, Audrey didn't use placate. Her spiritual intuition and professional knowledge told her that he needed to vent it out. "Then you should know of Sleeping Beauty and her prince," Gehrman Sparrow said with a soft, hoarse voice. "There's one such person who also entered a deep sleep until he suddenly woke up one day. He believes that his family is still around, and he works hard to improve himself, hoping that he can one day find them. This becomes his main driving force in life. Finally, he realized that he has slept for at least 300 years, or even more than 1,000 years, perhaps even longer. He can never find anything that he once had anymore." The intense pain and sense of loss was extremely clear to Audrey. She came to a realization. The gloomy, restrained, experienced, and ruthless Mr. World also has his own goals and reason for existing. This is in line with his gentle heart. How pitiful. Although he was giving an example using a fairy tale, some of the emotions he felt when saying certain words reflect reality. When he mentioned deep sleep, family, 300 years, more than 1,000 years, even longer, never find, his pain clearly increased. This means that he's from an ancient time and has lived to this day due to certain encounters? This matches the situation of Mr. Fool being an awakening ancient god. It's no wonder he became his blessed. Audrey quickly grasped the key to the matter. She pursed her lips and pondered for a moment. Did his family say anything? Did they say what they wanted him to do when he wakes up? Chapter 948 Meaning of Existence. From Audrey's point of view, Mr. World's current situation wasn't him suffering from a mental illness, nor was it close to pushing him to the state of losing control. It was because his goal in life and the meaning to his existence had been destroyed. It left him with a psychological barrier that just needed some guidance. Once she helped him set up a short-term goal, allowing him to find meaning in life, the problem would slowly be resolved. In the serene and silent darkness, Audrey heard Gehrman Sparrow answer in a deep voice across the wall. "No." As expected. Audrey wasn't surprised as she asked, "Then did he search for his family's last words? Did he search for their grave? Did he try to figure out the reason for the deep sleep?" The spirit body behind the wall seemed to vanish for a few seconds as there wasn't a single sound. After a moment, the hoarse voice continued, "No, not yet." "Not yet. That means that it's a possibility in the future?" Audrey felt relieved as she clearly felt that Gehrman Sparrow's emotional state wasn't as heavy and gloomy as before, without any interest in anything. He had a certain level of drive and a tiny sense of urgency. He was just still in a state of confusion. Taking this opportunity, Audrey cast placate again. The effects were much better than before. At the very least, she believed that Mr. World had used this impetus to escape from the abyss of gloominess and depression, returning to a normal person's disheartened state. Following that, Audrey didn't press on regarding how he could find clues or investigate, because this could bring about some resistance. She nodded in the dark room in a natural manner and said, "Yes, there are many things to do, and many things that need amending. Perhaps you will have the chance of meeting someone from the same bloodline? Perhaps a family member of his hasn't died from age, or had ended up living to this day due to some reason. The reason why there's meaning to life is because of its infinite possibilities. In the process of searching, make sure to not miss out on your surroundings. Life isn't just a one-way street. There are many branches and alleys. If only the former exists, how boring would it be? You should know how to approach it, to broaden your horizons, and to discover." Trying hard to recall all the suitable words she read in books, Audrey suddenly thought of something as her voice softened significantly. "Also, don't wear that thick mask. The thinner and transparent ones don't matter because everyone wears a mask when interacting with others. No one likes to directly express one's relatively private secrets to others. It's both a way to protect oneself and also a way to respect others. When Mr. World has a certain number of friends, a new meaning in life will naturally be formed." Audrey added inwardly, but she ultimately didn't say it out loud. She believed that it might even backfire. Unsurprisingly, Gehrman Sparrow fell silent again, seemingly still in confusion. After a few seconds, a voice that wasn't that hoarse sounded again. "Thank you for straightening me out, and for your treatment." "No, this is all a result of the strength inside you," Audrey replied seriously. She cast a final placate to confirm that Mr. World's mental state was back to normal and that it wouldn't relapse. She then heard Gairman Sparrow say, "Let's end it here for today, okay?" Audrey adjusted her tone and briskly replied, "Of course. It's not a serious problem. I can do another follow-up whenever you're free next week. Also, if it's possible, make some medicine to stabilize your mental state. Take it for 7 consecutive days. The ingredients are 10 grams of chamomile powder, 5 grams of rosemary powder, 10 milliliters of lemon balm extract. During this period, don't reduce your consumption of desserts, and try to relax yourself in an appropriate manner." In the dark and silent room, she propped herself against the wall with her hands and slowly stood up. At this moment, Gairman Sparrow's voice passed through the wall. "What's the consultation fee?" Audrey held one hand to the wall and turned her head in thought. "Wait till I get the potion formula for sequence 5 of the spectator pathway. I might need you to help me find the ingredients." "If the psychology alchemist provides me with the ingredients, she curled the ends of her lips and said, "When you return from the southern continent to Backland, remember to bring me some of the local produce as a gift." A super luxurious and light transportation coffin that's carried by 8 people? On the other side of the wall, Klein had the inexplicable urge to lampoon. He then stood up while clinging to the wall and sent Miss Justice back to the real world. With a wave of his hand, the room vanished. He returned to the seat of honor at the long bronze table and sat at the seat belonging to the fool. In front of him, there were the Black Emperor, Tyrant, and Red Priest cards of blasphemy on the right. On the left, there was the Creeping Hunger, which Leonard Mitchell had sent back via Miss Messenger Rionette Tynker. "I owe Miss Messenger 10,000 gold coins again." Klein retracted his gaze and raised his right hand to rub his temples. To prevent Ince Zangwill from escaping through the spirit world, he had already communicated with Rionette Tynker before he made plans for the murder. She was in charge of chasing away all the spirit world creatures around Revival Square, in exchange for that very same 10,000 gold coins. The only thing that caught him by surprise was that 0-08 was more terrifying than he imagined. With Ince Zangwill suffering from Deity's curse, and with King of Angels Adam having drained it, its first attempt was able to attract an unknown creature which could pass through Rionette Tynker's seal. If not for Daily Simone's forceful spirit channeling and signing a pact, Ince Zangwill might very well have escaped. Of course, while under Deity's curse, even if Ince Zangwill were to successfully escape, there was a high chance of him encountering other misfortunes, such as being thrown by the unknown creature to somewhere more dangerous or having it directly cause him harm. However, that wasn't within Klein's control. At the thought that he was 10,000 gold coins in debt again, Klein felt a headache, but his mental state was a lot better. After seeing the cocoon above the gray cloud, and the door of light beyond the staircase of light, he had suffered a shock that was as though a river had broken through its banks. He felt that all his expectations had been shattered. His mature worldview, outlook on life, and values had crumbled as a result, causing his entire being to fall into a turbid state, as though he were a walking zombie. Thankfully, he still had the innate desire to live and had sought out his private psychiatrist, Miss Justice Audrey, in time for treatment. Phew. Klein exhaled and forced himself to turn his thoughts towards the cocoons. And from the scene he saw, his first reaction was, an extremely high-level existence or sealed artifact had used different means to grab a large group of people from Earth at the same moment in time. Here, there were people who used the luck enhancement ritual, others bought strange silver plates, or had their phones hit by some strange virus. Then, these transmigrators had their souls sealed inside the cocoon and were left hanging above the door of light, awaiting a particular opportunity before being sent to the real world. Based on Klein's observation, the door of light didn't have any intelligence. It was operating based on pure instinct. This also meant that as long as the conditions were met, it would catalyze a cocoon and deliver the soul inside to a specific target's body. Based on the current circumstances, Klein guessed that there were probably 2 conditions that needed to be met. First, there mustn't be any other transmigrators prior, or the transmigrator had already been deemed to have failed or died. Second, the calling out of a certain object, item, or ritual. For instance, Klein Moretti had followed the Antigonus family's notebook to perform that dark divination. As for the rest, it's impossible to know. Unless I can find the corresponding content in Emperor Roselle's diary. Putting together everything that I know, my current theory should be very close to the truth. This will make it easy to explain why, despite being from the same era as the Emperor on Earth with less than a year in between us, our entry into the real world was separated by slightly more than 200 years. It's because we transmigrated at the same time, but we were released in different eras. Before entering the real world, who knows how long we've been asleep for? A brother from next door. Klein leaned back into his chair as his eyes shimmered before turning gloomy again. This was a hypothesis he came up with based on the conditions of the Door of Light, his situation, and the Emperor's diary. Of course, this didn't mean that there weren't other possibilities. At present, Klein was just unable to find evidence to support them. For example, a cocoon might represent the life of a transmigrator, but this was in contradiction with Klein's own recovery or the lack of change in his spirit body. And if his hypothesis wasn't too different from the truth, it meant that he had left Earth, transmigrating over for at least 200 years or even thousands of years. Even if he found the way and method to go back to Earth, he was unable to return to the place he called home. Compared to the gap in distance, the barrier of time left him in greater despair. This was the reason why it caused Klein's mental state to instantly collapse. Returning home was always his ultimate goal. Miss Justice is right. There are still many questions to resolve and to probe. What's the meaning behind hanging so many transmigrators behind the Door of Light? What goal does it have? Who set up everything back then? How many people were pulled in here? Where has the other person gone to? The celestial worthy of heaven and earth? Klein tried hard to engross himself in thinking, so as to find a new goal for the future. Unfortunately, he was only able to approach the Door of Light and not touch it. He was unable to touch it, grasp it, or even carefully inspect it. He had no means to do any studies to receive any direct information. I should consider finding clues from the real world. Also, since reaching Sequence 4 allows me to reach that gray cloud and see the Door of Light, will there be another qualitative change at Sequence 2? Will I be able to gain control over the Door of Light when that happens, allowing me to figure out the truth? Haha, I was affected by the 7 lights, the goddess, and a Rhodes's attitude. I almost imagine myself to be the real owner of the gray fog, and believe that I'm some great master above the spirit world. Now, from the looks of it, I'm just a test subject that was randomly thrown down. Once I fail, the next transmigrator will appear. Klein thought as he tapped the edge of the long bronze table. He was rather curious of another point. 3 broken cocoons, with one representing himself and another representing the Emperor. So who was the third one? Chapter 949 Direction of Investigations. Klein's first target of suspicion was undoubtedly Elf King Saniathrim. This ancient god had created chopsticks, made blood cakes, enjoyed eating animal innards, and was good at using spices for cooking. His descendants had facial features, hair color, and eyes that resembled Asians on Earth. Not only did Klein suspect that he was a transmigrator, even Emperor Roselle shared his feelings. Of course, after a deeper level of investigations, Roselle had ruled out that hypothesis from their language, symbols, traditional proverbs, and other facets. Klein believed that using chopsticks as cutlery, the preference for eating innards, and using spices wasn't an exclusive trait. To a species that enjoyed nature, it was possible for these to gradually appear in their daily life. As for why elves who wielded the sailor pathway were close to nature, Klein didn't know why. It was just something as described by the murals and texts they left behind. I for one felt that the Elf King is unlikely to be a transmigrator, but after seeing the 3 shattered cocoons, I can't be too sure. Perhaps he might be a fellow countryman. I can't rule out the possibility that this ancient god isn't a transmigrator but that one of the high-ranking elves around him is one. This can also allow the tradition to pass down in the name of the Elf King. Klein tapped his fingers as he thought silently. Almost at the same time, he had 2 directions for his investigation. Roselle's travels had elvish songster, Xiaofan, who served Saniathrim's queen of calamity Kohainam. As long as I enter her sea of collective subconscious, I should be able to see or make contact with the elves and find memory fragments regarding the ancient god. I can also use hypnosis, directly allowing her subconscious to speak. But the problem is that I'm not good at such matters. The last time I attempted to delve into Roselle's subconscious, I felt quick-tempered and could hardly calm down. Although I'm already a demigod, it also becomes more pressing that I resist the inclination towards madness and losing control. And I won't be able to regulate my mental state for quite some time. Forcefully spirit channeling isn't suitable for such a situation and for such a target. Klein frowned slightly. He felt that he might need a mystical item that was of a relatively high-level sequence in the spectator pathway, or an assistant that was at least a hypnotist. He began seriously considering the possibility of getting Miss Justice's help. There's no problem doing it. It's not impossible to leave by entering as a spirit body above the gray fog. I don't have to worry that Miss Justice will pry into the secret of a transmigrator. As long as Xiaofan doesn't have any knowledge of this, her subconscious and collective subconscious wouldn't point towards such a conclusion. And I can find the desired clues in details so they don't pay any notice. The biggest problem is that Miss Justice has no adventuring experience and she lacks it. Entering the sea of subconscious of an ancient figure is very dangerous to her. There might be the remnants of an ancient god in there at any time. Once I don't have the help of a psychiatrist, I will also end up the same. Even if I'm getting Miss Justice as support, I'll have to wait until she reaches sequence 5 so that she can use her level to make up for her lack of experience. When that happens, we can first attempt to hypnotize Xiaofan and see what we can learn from her mouth. If there's nothing of value, we can consider entering her dream to delve deeper into her consciousness and step into that sea. Yes, the dream charms I create now aren't potent enough. I might not be able to maintain such a long exploration. Sigh, the goddess won't directly respond to such trivial matters. It's a fixed feedback based on a fixed ritual. The corresponding beyonder characteristics have been returned to the church. Don't tell me that I need to bring Leonard with me? I wonder if pulling someone at the spirit body level can avoid the notice of the grandpa inside him. I'll do some research over the next few days. Klein reined in his thoughts and considered his second target of suspicion. This person didn't seem too special in the past, nor did Klein believe that he was a transmigrator. But now that his mind calmed down, he began processing his thoughts and analyzing. Klein realized that many points that he viewed as common sense weren't that simple on careful thought. They contained an unspeakable sense of horror. He suspected the ancient sun god, the City of Silver's creator. The 7 churches' separate Bibles have similarities to Earth's Western religions. It is similarly the case for their masses. Based on Little Sun's description, from what Emperor Roselle saw from Adam's chapel, and the content of the murals in the Forsaken Land of the Gods, it's clear that the ancient sun god's main symbol is the cross. He gave his children the names Adam and Ammon. The angels beneath him all have wings of light. I've not seen that in the other pathways to date. It's unknown how he rose up. He suddenly appeared late in the second epoch, killed several ancient gods, and took their various authorities. I never thought much about these details in the past. It's quite scary now that I think deeply of it. Klein drew a gasp as he began feeling more convinced that it was the ancient sun god instead of Elf King Seniathrim. His experiences were just too legendary, more of a protagonist of an era than Emperor Roselle. Of course, his outcome was rather tragic, becoming a feast for his kings of angels. Emperor Roselle was also tragic but in no way as terrible. Doesn't this imply Ammon's and Adam's attitude in a certain sense? They believe that the gray fog is related to their father, but due to their different pathways, they made different choices? There's a certain chance that Adam can't see the gray fog. He isn't a high-sequence beyonder of the Fate, Marauder, Seer, and Apprentice pathways. Klein nodded slightly. Based on these clues, he also had a direction of investigation that didn't require him to make contact with major figures at the angel level. In Grozel's travels lived a Cetic snowman who survived the third epoch and had served the ancient sun god. The problem circles back to itself. There's nothing to doubt about the rest for the time being. Klein slowly exhaled, reached out his right hand, and picked up the newly obtained card of blasphemy. Red Priest card. Infusing his spirituality into it, the card produced a blood-red light, forming a palm-sized illusory book. The pages of the book flipped, presenting portraits of a lifelike Roselle Gustave. He was either wearing a hunter's attire, raising his middle finger, walking through a burning building, or standing behind a trap. He had all sorts of attires and was doing all kinds of things. Sequence 9. Hunter. Sequence 8. Provoker. Sequence 7. Pyromaniac. Sequence 6. Conspirer. Sequence 5. Reaper. Sequence 4. Iron-blooded knight. Sequence 3. War bishop. Sequence 2. Weather warlock. Sequence 1. Conqueror. Sequence 0. Red priest. Klein's gaze swept past the different portraits on the tarot card and imprinted the content into his mind. He wasn't surprised at this pathway sequence O's ritual to become a god. This was because Hermes had once told Roselle that the red in Red Priest meant the red of war. Therefore, when he saw stirring up a war that sweeps an entire continent and gain victory, he wasn't stirred at all. After flipping the Red Priest card, he began thinking about problems and felt his mental state improve. He rubbed his temples, finally feeling exhausted. I should set a short-term goal and investigate the person behind the Great Smog of Backlund. This is something that I've yet to complete. Yes, I should continue the arms deal according to my original plans, and return to Backlund after receiving the money. Now there are 2 clues. First, the captain of the Royal Guards, Viscount Stratford, and the other is MI9's deputy director, Brigadier General Conas Kilgore. Klein tried to pull himself up and decided to occupy himself with something. Before leaving the grey fog, he threw the mental medicine recipe that Miss Justice had given him to the Crimson Star representing the moon Emlyn. He requested this vampire, who was good at making it, to make a week's worth at £1 a bottle. Backlund. Within the Odora family's villa. Emlyn White, who was waiting in the activity room, curled his lips and thought to himself, a transaction that's just £7. I really don't want to do it. The world can concoct it himself if he's a little careful. He hadn't objected to the world's request, because after spending £5,000 to buy the Sequence 5 Vampire Beyonder characteristic, he only had £730 left. At this moment, Cosme walked over, looking like a middle-aged gentleman. After exchanging a bow, the Sanguine Baron asked, Emlyn, why are you suddenly here? Emlyn immediately felt a little guilty before recalling his previous experiences of conversing with the Hanged Man and the world. He tipped his chin slightly and answered in a seemingly casual manner, I've received a Sequence 5 Scarlet Scholar Beyonder characteristic. I wonder when we can begin the ritual to make me a Viscount. Cosme was taken aback as he asked in surprise, You obtained a Scarlet Scholar Beyonder characteristic? Emlyn glanced at him and nodded with a faint smile. That's right. He didn't explain how he had obtained the Beyonder characteristic, as though Cosme wasn't worthy of knowing. Cosme turned agape as he fell silent. After a few seconds he said, Wait till the next full moon. He paused and said, I happen to have something for you. My grandfather wishes to inform you that an important figure will be coming to Backlund. He wishes to meet you. Emlyn's pupils dilated instantly. The ancient ones of the Sanguine that lived since the Second Epoch to this day, together with the Grade O sealed artifacts, all of those important existences at the angel level didn't exceed 5 in number. Chapter 950 Keeping Secrets. Emlyn fell silent for 2 seconds as he lowered his chin and asked, Who is it? To him, angels were naturally worthy of respect, but those who could truly make him bow his head were the important figures addressed as he by every Sanguine. They had witnessed and experienced the Sanguine's long history, the source of his pride. I'm not sure. But in short, I'll notify you when the time comes. Cosme Odora shook his head. The person is coming because of the ancestor's revelation? There are subsequent instructions? Why doesn't the ancestor directly give me a revelation? This will be better concealed. I'm her chosen one. This is to avoid agitating Mr. Fool? Questions flashed past Emlyn's mind as he answered them himself. He didn't speak further as he wore his top hat and left Odora's villa. When he arrived at the door, he looked at the thin clouds that could hardly block out the sun. Emlyn curled his lips in disdain, raised his hand to press down on his hat, and ran for a rental carriage at the end of the street as he inwardly mumbled, Such weather really isn't suitable for heading out. The medicine that the world wants isn't rare. It can be concocted in 15 minutes. The ingredients I ordered previously should be in by today. I can carry out the transaction with Miss Magician that I've delayed for days. Backlund. Charwood Borough. Furs placed glass bottles on an altar and looked at the light blue and golden liquids, feeling the exhilaration from shopping. More enticing than a cocktail. I wonder what it tastes like. Putting some ice in might make it taste better. Seriously, what am I thinking? These are all medicine. Furs sputtered at herself and hurriedly cleaned up the room. Upon receiving the medicine required for medical treatment, she finished her preparations for heading to the abandoned castle in Dallaire Forest. She was just waiting for Zio to return. After tidying up certain matters, Furs slumped onto the sofa and casually picked up a few newspaper copies and began planning her itinerary for the day. Set off at dusk. Dinner will probably be when we arrive at the town bordering the forest. Amidst her silent mumbling, Furs flipped to the copy of News at Sea. Suddenly, her gaze froze as a familiar name was reflected in her eyes. Gehrman Sparrow. This adventurer had appeared at sea again, boarding the Black Tulip with a middle-aged name known as Death Consul. He killed Admiral Hell Ludwell, changing the lineup of the 7 pirate admirals again. Ilil Furs subconsciously patted her chest, unsure what she was happy about. At that instant, she had a baffling feeling that Gehrman Sparrow's experiences were sufficiently legendary, something that could definitely be written into a novel. He wore a white shirt with a black trench coat. His collar was raised up high, covering his chin and mouth. He had a pair of dark green eyes with golden-brown sideburns. He held a silver chest that was big enough to put a tiny violin in it. Furs and Zio exchanged looks as they lowered their gaze, staring at their toes. As a high-ranking deacon of the Church of Evernights Nighthawks, one of the 22 members of power in the church, and one of the 3 bigwigs of the Red Gloves, Crestet Sesamir wasn't someone who cared about parading himself around. He enjoyed traveling alone, taking the transportation that commoners took, making him appear like an ordinary clergyman. After transferring to another line, he eventually arrived in Northborough. He then took a rental carriage and headed straight for St. Samuel Cathedral, where he met Backland Diocese's Archbishop, St. Anthony Stevenson. After greeting each other and praising the goddess, Sesamir found a seat and said, "I'll be troubling you to provide me with some help for the next couple weeks." The clean-shaved Archbishop, Anthony, in his black robe with red accents, sat down as well. He deliberated before asking, "Is it something to do with Insangwil?" "Yes." Sesamir nodded slightly. "The Holy See wishes that I inform you that another servant of the goddess, the matron of the Evernight Cloister, Mam Ariana, will be in Backland not long from now." This ascetic was ranked first among all the 13 archbishops. Without waiting for St. Anthony's inquiry, he explained in detail. Mam Ilya learned plenty of important information from Insangwil's remnant spirit, including his mental problems that 0-08 used to escape, as well as the details of his cooperation with the royal family and the Demonis sect. After machinating the Great Smog of Backland, Insangwil was betrayed by 0-08 and had ended up being possessed by the Red Angel evil spirit. He headed for the southern continent alone in an attempt to set up a trap to hunt Mam Ilya. An important point to take note of is that in Insangwil's memories, there is a very important underground ruin. It's in the northwestern outskirts of Backland, an area just before the Tussock River flows in. "My mission is to find that ruin." St. Anthony finished listening in silence before asking in thought, "Insangwil doesn't know of the exact location?" "He has never been there before?" Sesamir shook his head. He had entered, but he was led in there and didn't grasp the required key information. St. Anthony tersely acknowledged before asking, "Have you figured out which batch of people from the royal family that Insangwil was working with?" "No." Crestet Sesamir paused and continued, "Based on normal logic, regardless of whether the partners don disguises, if they meet, there should be the corresponding memory fragments, but inside Insangwil's spirit body, there were no traces of that. It was as though it never existed. Perhaps it's an influence of a deed. The source of the deed's power that even a Sequence 4 demigod can't resist is something worth paying attention to." St. Anthony nodded very slightly. He thought and said, "The telegram didn't include much. I do not know the exact sequence of events. Who exactly killed Insangwil?" Crestet Sesamir exhaled slowly and said, "A name you might never believe, Klein Moretti. The Nighthawk who died in the line of duty during the Tingen incident?" Anthony's wrinkles deepened. "Yes, that's what Ilya sent back. No one knows how Klein Moretti, who was only a Sequence 8, had resurrected, or how he could kill Insangwil, a demigod wielding 0-08. Upon saying this, Sesamir's expression turned somewhat odd. "The Holy See requests us to strictly keep this intel confidential. We are not to divulge this to anyone who isn't an archbishop or high-ranking deacon. Furthermore, we are not to pursue Klein Moretti, pretending as though he's still in his grave." St. Anthony fell silent for a few seconds as though he recalled something trivial. He nodded and said, "Perhaps he's a blessed of the goddess." Sesamir suddenly looked up at St. Anthony as though he was a lunatic. His lips quivered, but he ultimately didn't say a word. Anthony didn't continue the topic as he looked at the door and said sternly, "Your mission might need plenty of investigations. This requires enough manpower." Soest's team has completed their mission in the southern continent. I'll get them to return quickly and follow your instructions. All right. Crestet Casimir didn't put up any objections. Rest for the remainder of the day before returning to Backlund? Leonard looked up at team captain, Soest. Soest looked pitifully at Leonard, who had been silent for quite some time, and nodded. That's right. After watching this spirit warlock leave his room, Leonard sighed and leaned against the wall. At this moment, dark red light surged out from before his eyes, enveloping him completely without any prior warning. Chapter 951. Drawing a card. By the time Leonard reacted, he saw numerous towering stone pillars, as well as a towering palace that looked like a giant's residence above the endless grayish-white fog that was being propped up by these stone pillars. His green eyes wore a blank look. After a second, Leonard found himself sitting on a high-backed chair beside a long mottled bronze table at some point in time. Beside him and opposite him were high-backed chairs that exuded solemnity. And at the end of the long mottled table, where the seat of honor was, a figure was shrouded in thick gray fog. The figure was leaning into his seat leisurely, as though he was overlooking everything. When this figure appeared in Leonard's eyes, he felt as though he was on a liner, seeing a bottomless abyss whose boundaries were nowhere to be seen. It also felt like he had left the city and was on the outskirts, looking up to see lofty mountains that tore through the clouds. Instantly, many thoughts flashed through Leonard's mind. He had a rough guess as to what he was experiencing. As a beyonder of the church, a believer who knew that deities truly exist, he wasn't able to resist his feelings. He subconsciously wished to leave his seat and prostrate before the existence before him. The might of a deity was boundless. Just as Leonard stood up, he was pressed down by an invisible force. A slow and calm voice resonated in his ears. There's no need for such trouble. You can call me Mr. Fool. The Fool. Indeed. Leonard's fear of the unknown had settled immediately. Although he was still worried about what would happen next, he wasn't that perturbed any longer. He didn't sit uneasily with a dry mouth and parched lips. He got up halfway, pressed his hand to his chest, and bowed. Honorable Mr. Fool, why did you summon me here? As an experienced nighthawk and a red glove who had participated in major cases, Leonard knew how dangerous it was to establish a connection with a secret existence. He knew that he had slid down the edge of the abyss and had no chance of redemption. At that moment when he decided to chant the fool's honorific name, he was able to foresee his tragic end. But for revenge, he had made the choice regardless. However, everyone had the instinct to survive. Recalling how Klein Moretti, who believed in the fool, was still alive and had even become a demigod, Leonard couldn't help but hold out some hope and expectations. At this moment, he heard the fog-enshrouded fool chuckle. Since you prayed to me for help, then based on the principle of equivalent exchange, you definitely need to pay the price. Leonard's body trembled as he bowed his head lower. What is it you wish? After a brief pause, the fool's voice sounded again. There's no rush. Perhaps there will be something that requires you to provide help to certain people. Have a seat. Leonard slowly calmed himself down and sat down. He looked around and asked, Klein Moretti, has been here like me? The fool said with a calm tone. In a different manner. Different manner. Indeed, Klein didn't enter because he chanted the honorific name. He had been introduced by that death consul named Isaac Eggers before becoming one of Mr. Fool's faithful. Leonard couldn't help but survey the area, and he discovered that there were a total of 22 high-backed chairs around the long mottled table. It corresponds to the 22 Beyonder pathways. There are also 22 tarot cards. The Fool. Just as Leonard came up with a theory, he heard Mr. Fool chuckle. Other than you, there are other living beings that have been pulled in here for various reasons. They earnestly wished for me to convene a gathering to carry out the exchange of information and the transaction of materials and formulas. They also help each other. This allows them to rapidly advance, eventually becoming high-sequence Beyonders. This is a little different from the secret organization represented by tarot cards I had imagined. It's rather loosely organized. What motives does Mr. Fool have to agree to such a request? After coming to the ancient palace above the gray fog, Leonard felt high-strung, causing his thought processes to be a lot more agile than usual. He came up with all kinds of questions. After successfully achieving revenge, he had been feeling low-spirited and empty for a moment, as though he had lost his goal in life. However, he quickly pulled himself together. This was because Daly's death told him that he wasn't strong enough. To reduce the number of casualties of his companions in future missions and so as to not lack the ability to save them, he needed to reach Sequence 4 at the very least. He needed to become a demigod. Therefore, the fool's words had stirred his heart. He felt that it was an opportunity. Meanwhile, he also believed that by joining the gathering, he could deeply understand the situation of the secret organization. It helped in maximally averting the danger that resulted from establishing contact with the fool. After some deliberation, Leonard asked, "Klein Moretti is also a regular member of this gathering? Does he have a seat here?" The fool replied without much concern, "Yes." Leonard fell silent for a second as he asked, "Honorable Mr. Fool, can I join this regular gathering?" Shrouded in the gray fog, the fool said with a smile, "Sure. But when you return, remember to mention this to Palez Zoroast about it. Do not attempt to hide it from him." Him. Old man really is an angel. It's no wonder the luck siphon charm is so magical. Although Leonard had already expected this, he still couldn't help but be alarmed after receiving confirmation from Mr. Fool. He hesitated for a moment and said, "Why must I tell Palez Zoroast?" Although he had a good relationship with Palez Zoroast and had established a certain level of trust, he still felt wary. The reason why he had made the request to join Mr. Fool's secret gathering was to balance the latent danger of the ancient parasite. He then heard Mr. Fool reply with a smile, "Many a time, striking fear is a lot more useful than conflict." Striking fear is a lot more useful than conflict. That's right, forcefully creating a balance might agitate old man regardless. The final battlefield will be in my body, and it would be extremely disadvantageous to me. By striking fear into him, I can get him to recognize the situation. Even if he has ill intent, he will think of another solution and take another path. Leonard bowed his head in enlightenment. "Honorable Mr. Fool, I have no more questions." At the end of the long bronze table, the fool conjured a deck of tarot cards and lifted up his hand and pointed at them. They have each selected a tarot card to represent their code name. You can also choose one. The deck has the cards of their respective owners taken away. They do use tarot cards as their code names. Leonard exhaled and couldn't help but ask again, "Which card is Klein Moretti?" "The world," the fool said casually. "It's him and also not him." "What does that mean?" Leonard didn't dare to ask further. He extended his right hand and pulled out a card from the deck of tarot cards. Flipping it over, he saw a goddess pouring holy water, with stars littering the background. The star card. This didn't match Leonard's taste, but since he had already completed the ritual under Mr. Fool's watch, he could only accept it. Return. The gathering happens every Monday at 3 in the afternoon, Backlund time. Shrouded in the gray fog, the fool raised his hand and made Leonard, who was rushing to bow, vanish from the ancient palace. The fool Klein chuckled as he flipped all the tarot cards. All of them had the same picture with the same sky-filled stars. All of them were the star cards. After laughing for a while, Klein cast his gaze to the crimson star that represented Leonard. While attempting to pull the poet above the gray fog, he had made some careful observation and had discovered that there was a blob of light hiding in Leonard Mitchell's body. It seemed to be made of countless ringed worms, hidden deep inside his soul body. This made Klein confirm that Palez Zoroast had only parasitized Leonard at a preliminary stage. He didn't control Leonard's body of heart and mind, astral projection, ether body, and physical body. And after advancing to become a demigod, Klein had gained a deeper control over the mysterious space above the gray fog, allowing him to pull in anyone he wanted, without targeting the soul. He could make a selection. Therefore, Klein decided to not touch Leonard's soul body, and only pulled his astral projection above the gray fog. This avoided agitating Palez Zoroast or end up bringing him into the mysterious space. Of course, it was almost certain that the Sequence 1 angel of the Marauder pathway would notice it, and the ability to enter the dreams of others stemmed from the astral projection of Beyonders of the Evernight pathway, so it didn't affect Leonard's ability to do what he was good at in this mysterious space. Let's hope that he can escape from Palez Zoroast's parasitizing bit by bit. Klein suddenly sighed. The reason why he made Leonard join the Tarot Club was because he wished to help this former teammate grow stronger, allowing him to escape the claws of Palez Zoroast. If that Marauder pathway angel didn't have any ill intent, he could get Leonard to help him hide from Amon and aid his recovery. This would speed up his switching of parasitic targets. Retracting in his gaze, Klein thought for a moment. He threw the Hunter Pathways Sequence 6 Conspirer Potion formula to the point of light representing Danitz. He then instructed him to leave the southern continent and return to the Golden Dream. Black Hunting Spider's Composite Eye. Sphinx's Brain. Danitz recalled the content he had just seen in a daze as he stood up in delight. He planned to immediately bid farewell to Anderson and leave the dangerous southern continent. After coming to the door of the Fog Sea's strongest hunter, he knocked on the wooden door, only to see it open. Anderson hadn't locked the door. Danitz was puzzled as he cast his gaze inside and saw Anderson holding a knife and sliding it against his abdomen. Chapter 952. What a small world. Danitz jumped in fright as he blurted out, "Sorry, I didn't see anything." Before he could finish his sentence, he had already pulled the door handle towards him. Bang! The door closed, emitting a sound that echoed through the corridor. At this point, Danitz finally came to a realization. What was I doing just now? What is Anderson doing? He instinctively removed the black boxing glove and thought bitterly with a frown. Finally, he decided to return to his room, pack his luggage, and leave. As for what Anderson was trying to do, he felt that something was amiss despite his curiosity. He had no plans on getting himself involved in it, lest he fell into a trap. Captain said that I should maintain fear and respect towards the unknown. So, I should distance myself from this. Just as Danitz turned around, he suddenly heard the door unlock before being opened. Anderson, whose buttons on the lower part of his shirt weren't buttoned up, walked out with a dull pitch-black knife. He looked at Danitz with a mixed expression. "Aren't you going to try to stop me?" Danitz acutely noticed the chance to mock him as he sniggered. "That's your freedom. If you didn't leave a will, I'll be rich." Anderson rubbed his cheeks. "Aren't you curious about what I encountered?" Danitz glanced at him suspiciously. "I keep feeling as though you're up to something." Anderson roared with laughter. "Well, I had been captured some time ago and was soaked in strange blood with all kinds of ingredients. I was corroded by it for an extended period of time until a strange chrysalis was formed inside my body. This was to create the effect of having a certain level of attraction towards high-sequence beyonders of the Hunter pathway." As he spoke, he pointed at his abdomen. Danitz was taken aback. "I've never really heard of something like that. If you were another sex, I might have imagined that you're pregnant." He paused for a moment before asking. "That strange fellow in Revival Square was attracted by the baby, no chrysalis in your stomach?" Anderson nodded as Danitz gestured with his hands. "You were trying to cut open your abdomen to extract the chrysalis?" Anderson replied honestly, "Yes, I'm worried about how it would affect me, or if it will continue attracting demigods. I have to make every second count to remove this latent problem." Danitz thought before asking in puzzlement, "Then why aren't you making the attempt? You forgot to set up a will, and you want me to be your witness?" Anderson's facial muscles twitched as he chuckled. "Not bad. Your provoker potion should almost be digested." He then sighed. "After some careful analysis, I believe there's no direct way to extract it. Otherwise, they wouldn't have soaked me in blood and allow the ingredients to seep into me. They could have just opened up my stomach and placed the chrysalis inside before sewing me up." Without waiting for Danitz's reply, he said in thought, "Don't you have the method to contact Gehrman Sparrow? He's been through so much and knows so much, so I would like to consult him on how to resolve this problem." In recent months, Danitz was extremely afraid of people raising the matter about him knowing Gehrman Sparrow, so he subconsciously retorted, "No. I haven't seen him since I left the Golden Dream." Anderson curled the corner of his lips and said, "When you were writing to Gehrman Sparrow, I was beside him and have met his messenger." Danitz's expression immediately froze. He forced a smile after a few seconds. "Then why don't you directly summon his messenger?" Anderson raised his hand again and touched his throat, chuckling. "I don't know the ritual for summoning his messenger." Danitz still suspected that Anderson was up to something, and was unwilling to confirm that he had been repeatedly communicating with Gehrman Sparrow. He then suggested, "Actually, you can always seek the help of our captain on such matters. She's very knowledgeable and good at research. She knows many secret techniques and can also seek the Church of the God of Knowledge and Wisdom for help. She should be able to give you the solution for resolving the matter of the chrysalis in your stomach. Haha, if you're embarrassed, I can talk to her for you." Just as he said that, he saw Anderson's face beam. He quickly replied with a rushed tone, "All right, let's do that. I've already packed my luggage." When shall we set off? Danitz fell into a daze for a few seconds, feeling that he had been tricked by Anderson. He returned to the room, drank his remaining beer, and threw all the miscellaneous items into his luggage bag, leaving behind a dried leaf with golden patterns. This was the token Danitz previously used to establish contact with the Northern States' dominant leader, General May Sanchez. Following Gairman Sparrow's instructions, he left the leaf inside and allowed the person in charge to follow up. In the room that Danitz checked out of, a candle was suddenly lit as a 2-meter-tall scarlet flame burgeoned. Amidst the flames, a figure walked out. He was wearing a silk top hat, black formal suit, and had white sideburns. He looked outstanding with his deep blue eyes and mature demeanor. He was none other than Klein as Dwayne Dantes. After picking up the leaf with golden patterns, Klein left the hotel, circling around the sealed-off Revival Square, and came to Kukua's core region, White Feather Square. May Sanchez's residence was there, located beside a death cathedral that descended downwards. As a standard Loanese gentleman, Dantes looked out of place when walking through the city. Here, the foreigners were a minority, with most foreigners seen around the few major embassies located around Rejoice Square. The other places were filled with mostly locals from Balam. Their skin was slightly brown, and they had curly black hair. Their facial features were soft, and in the eyes of most people from the northern continent, people of the same sex all looked the same, aside from the differences in height and weight. These locals, be it male or female, enjoyed rolling dried tobacco leaves into Balam cigarettes. Along the way, Klein would see residents spewing out smoke alongside the road from time to time. In addition, many of them hung a fruit known as dalawa by their waists. This fruit was the size of 2 fists, with thick skin. After digging open a tiny hole and eating the flesh inside, one could use it to store water, alcohol, and other beverages. Based on Klein's observations, they mostly drank an orange-yellow guatter. It was sour with a hint of sweetness, good at quenching thirst and relieving heat. It was also great at keeping people awake. I didn't have a chance to try it before. Klein mumbled as he found the guard manning the general's residence and sought to meet a man named Haggis. Due to his appearance as a Loanese person and a gentleman, the guard didn't deny his request or make it difficult for him. He got a person to head in to get a man in his 30s. The man's facial features and skin were that of a standard Balam native. However, his curly black hair had been pulled straight and neatly combed back as though he was trying to mimic members of high society in the various countries of the northern continent. He wore a white shirt and a black vest, matched with a very formal bow tie. Upon seeing Dwayne Dantes, he said in standard Loanese, "Good afternoon, I'm Haggis. Nice to meet you." His accent was a little odd, different from any borough in Lone. Klein had lived in high society for quite a period of time, so he wasn't too surprised. He said with a smile, "Good afternoon, I'm Dwayne Dantes. I never expected to meet a gentleman who's so good at using the accent of Loanese nobles." Haggis couldn't help but smile. Many children of noble birth from Lone have come to East and West Balam to seek out opportunities. I was fortunate to learn from them. Oh, I might know some of them. Klein wasn't in a rush to talk business as he began making small talk with Haggis like a gentleman. Haggis smiled. "My friend includes Colonel Alfred Hall, the second son of an earl." Huh. Klein let out a soft chuckle. "I once met Earl Hall at a charity party. He's a true noble. What a small world." Haggis nodded in agreement. Perhaps this is an arrangement of fate. Unfortunately, Alfred was transferred to East Balam last year. He didn't continue as he immediately invited Dwayne Dantes into the general's residence. When passing through the side door, Klein suddenly looked up, glancing at the embedded stained glass above. The glass shimmered like a rainbow under the illumination of sunlight, as though gazes were sweeping past. Chapter 953 Prophecy. Klein retracted his gaze in a natural manner, held his gold-inlaid cane, and followed closely behind Haggis before entering the general's residence. The architecture style was completely unlike those found in the southern continent. It didn't make any use of light manipulation to make the rooms appear dark and gloomy, nor did they boldly use some human bones as accessories to produce a strong visual impact. Instead, it was more in the style of the northern continent. Furthermore, there was an undeniable hint of Intis influence. Every column was covered in segmented gold foil. The use of colors in the murals were warm, and there were sculptures embedded with gold. A beautiful spiral staircase descended from above, connecting all 4 stories before ending in the middle of the huge hall where it faced the entrance. It was extremely grand. I have to say that countries led by the Church of the Eternal Blazing Sun are really at the forefront when it comes to gold artwork. It doesn't have the feeling of the gaudy nouveau riche. Klein swept his gaze to the palm-sized golden angels that extended out from the staircase's railings and mid-sections of the columns, holding back his urge to caress them. Looking at the guards standing by the 2 sides, he casually found a topic and said to Haggis, "Colonel Alfred Hall seems to have made some significant contributions in West Balam?" Haggis nodded and used a Loanese noble accent to say, "He's a determined and brave man. He once led a special forces team of more than 30 men to raid an Intis battalion with more than 1,000 people, completely crippling them. I heard that he had also made significant contributions in East Balam, therefore, becoming a colonel before the age of 30. Sounds impressive. Perhaps Miss Justice's brother has already become a Beyonder with quite a significantly high sequence. In every aristocratic family, every generation should have some members taking the Beyonder path. Heh. If this Mr. Alfred finally reaches his goal of becoming a Beyonder with a relatively high sequence and gaining the rank of Brigadier General or Major General through hardship, I wonder how sad would he be when he returns to Baklan to realize that he's no match for his sister's dog." Having drank his medicine before heading out today, Klein used the act of lampooning to adjust his mental state. He didn't ask further about Alfred as he asked with a curious tone, "I realize that there are some differences in the traditions of East and West Balam. Here, in many houses, there are people with human bone decorations, but it's not present in East Balam. I've been here several times, but I've never been able to bring myself to get the answer to this question." Haggis stopped and pointed to the exaggerated spiral staircase. "Mr. Dantes, the general will be here in a few minutes." After informing him of this, he chuckled. It's actually not common to see human bone traditions. Only fiefs that came under the royal family of the Balam Empire still have this tradition. To us, the death of family members doesn't mean that our relationship has come to an end. After the burial, we will take a piece of their bones and place it at home as a decoration as a way to indicate that the deceased continue being with the living. As for which bone to choose, it will be decided by the interring priest through a ritual. The best and most symbolic part is the skull. Some families will even make the skull into a vessel for drinking alcohol, using it only when entertaining the most honored guests. Mr. Dantes, if you close a deal this time, I wish to invite you home. I wish to offer finest wine in my grandfather's skull to show my respects to you." 211 Klein's expression nearly fell apart. He felt that he was incapable of accepting the local customs in this aspect. He laughed and was just about to be perfunctory when he saw a figure slowly walking down the golden railings of the staircase. The person didn't wear a hat. He was wearing a cut black military attire with shimmering gold buttons. The sash he wore was red like blood. He had light brown skin and a rather soft facial outline. His facial features looked scrunched up in the middle of his head, making his face appear abnormally big. Klein, who had obtained the relevant information from various channels, instantly recognized the man to be the dominant ruler of West Balam's northern state. He was May Sanchez, who declared himself as general. On the surface, he wavered between the factions of Lone, Intis, Faina Potter, Faysac, and the Resistance, maintaining a balance, but secretly, he had received the support of the numinous Episcopate's royal family faction. Meanwhile, Klein suspected that this native general had established a solid working relationship with the Church of the God of Knowledge and Wisdom. As for May Sanchez's strength, be it Vice Admiral Iceberg Edwina or Admiral of Stars Catlia, he was noted to be a Sequence 5. But the 2 ladies didn't mention which pathway he was from, as the powers this local general exhibited were mostly related to spirits, but he carried a mystical item from the death pathway. "Good afternoon, Your Excellency." Klein took off his hat, pressed his hand to his chest, and bowed. At this moment, he sensed gazes locking onto him from some unknown location. They were like lights that flashed across the golden angel figures, the sunlight reflected from the stained glass or the lustrous glow from the smooth marble. "Hello there, Mr. Dantes," May Sanchez replied in Dutanese. Having grasped Dutanese through his marionette, Klein naturally was able to understand him. However, in the southern continent, the longer he stayed in East and West Balam, the more he felt the similarities between Dutanese and ancient Faysac. Although these 2 languages obviously followed different systems, making it much more difficult if he were to truly study Dutanese, certain details were shockingly similar, as it was as though they shared a common heritage. Klein could only be certain that the heritage wasn't Jotun. Pretending as though he hadn't noticed anything, he very naturally chatted with May Sanchez until the other party raised the topic of the arms deal. "How many goods do you have in total?" Klein laughed and replied, "It wouldn't be a problem equipping 3,000 to 4,000 people. In addition, there will be a few cannons." May Sanchez fell silent and said, "Name your price." Klein pretended to deliberate and said, "If you wish for me to send the goods to the northern state, the price would be 50,000 pounds. If you send your troops to retrieve the goods with me and be responsible for the subsequent transportation and safety, it will only cost 40,000 pounds. May Sanchez thought and said, "The latter. Take the down payment and go with my men. Once they see the goods and move it onto our carriages, my men will pay the rest." He paused for a moment and then added, "However, I do not have much lone gold pounds." "So you don't have enough foreign reserves?" Klein surveyed the area and said with an unconcerned smile, "You can directly pay me in gold coins, or even gold bars or gold bricks." May Sanchez was rather decisive. He didn't waste any time to nod and say, "Deal. I'll get Haggis to bring my men and money to you tomorrow." "Not bad. I like doing business with people who don't haggle." Klein first heaved a sigh of relief before suspecting if his price was too low. After Klein left the general's residence, May Sanchez suddenly looked up and said to the person above, "Your Excellency Luca, is this the person you're waiting for?" One story above the beautiful staircase, a figure slowly appeared. He was an elder in a white robe with inlaid brass lines. His hair was completely white and neatly combed. His pair of gray-green eyes were so deep that they appeared bottomless. He replied with an unhurried tone, "There's no way to be certain. Although my prophecy tells me that I'll meet the person who can resolve my future predicament in the next 2 days here, that person was too ordinary. Besides being a beyonder, there's nothing worth taking note of. Of course, I can't tell the more profound truth. He might have an existence that's at least not weaker than me behind him." Having said that, he slowly walked down and after a few seconds, said, "I'll attempt to use a dream to see if I can discover more." "Do I need to prepare a special room for you?" May Sanchez asked reverently. Lucas shook his head. "I'll use the activity room here. The best time will be 4 hours later. Don't disturb me before that happens." He then entered the room, sat down, and leaned against the sofa. He relaxed himself, closed his eyes and fell silent. Only when it slowly turned dark did the old gentleman fall asleep. In the dream, he found himself standing in the hall of the general's residence, standing at the first floor of the beautiful staircase. By the side was May Sanchez and numerous guards. The middle-aged man named Dwayne Dantes was standing opposite him when he suddenly curled his lips into a smile, revealing an exaggerated smile. Flames soared up as poker cards fell from above. Luca's green eyes instantly darkened as Dwayne Dantes's body instantly fell into a strange darkness that appeared. The old white-robed gentleman immediately spread his arms open, revealing a dark vortex at his chest. The vortex expanded and devoured Dwayne Dantes. Before Luca could confirm the situation, he felt something. He turned to the side and saw May Sanchez's face squirming and turning tall before instantly becoming another Dwayne Dantes. Almost at the same time, Haggis and all the guards present turned into Dwayne Dantes. All of them were casting their gaze at Luca. Luca was jolted awake, and under the watch of May Sanchez, who had entered at some point in time, he faltered for 2 seconds and said heavily, "I have to personally meet that gentleman from before and see the demigod behind him." Before he finished his sentence, he subconsciously turned his head to look out the window. At this moment, the street lamps lit up. It was dark outside, and the crimson moon's moonlight was strangely tainted with a bloody color. Another blood moon. Thankfully there's Mr. Fool. I must say that there are way too many blood moons this year. It's only been 2 months since the last time. I didn't even have any time to prepare. Furs, who sat up, wiped her cold sweat, and muttered silently. She had arrived at a town near Dallaire Forest and had checked into a hotel. She shared a room with Zio, and they had made preparations to do some investigations of the abandoned castle early tomorrow morning. To Furz's surprise, there was a blood moon just as she was preparing to get some rest. At this moment, she seemed to recall something as her body stiffly turned to the side. Zio, who had exhorted her to sleep early, had already woken up at some point in time. She was looking at her with her eyes open. Chapter 954 Strange Ancient Castle. Furz's gaze met Zio's in midair as both parties remained silent. After a while, Furz chuckled dryly. Haha, you haven't fallen asleep? Zio frowned and said, What happened to you? Nothing. Didn't I tell you before? Whenever the full moon happens, I won't be in a good state. It's even worse during the blood moon, Furz replied as though everything was normal. Zio sized her up and pulled her blanket. I remember that you brought sleeping pills? There's no need for that. I'm fine now. Seeing that Zio wasn't pressing further, Furz secretly heaved a sigh of relief. Go back to sleep. We still have to head into the forest early tomorrow morning. Zio didn't say another word as she turned around, gripped the blanket, and closed her eyes. Before long, her breathing turned heavier and became more drawn out and uniform. Furz stared blankly at the ceiling as her thoughts ran wild. At some point in time, she fell asleep as well. The next day at noon, in the core region of Delaire Forest, in front of a collapsed, ancient castle covered in green vines, Furz wiped the perspiration on her forehead and exhaled. We're finally here, Zio shot her a glance and said. The boss at the hotel told me that we only need 2 hours to get here. They had set off before 6 in the morning, but they had spent nearly 7 hours to arrive. The corners of Furz's lips twitched as she said, Ideal conditions and reality are different. There weren't any trails for us to take towards the end. We needed to explore and forge a new path ourselves. Zio took out her triangular blade, nodded and said, You should have foreseen this from the beginning, but you refused to have a guide as suggested by the hotel's boss. As an astrologer, I don't believe such trivialities will cause any trouble. Look, aren't we there now? Besides, the time is perfect. The wraiths and ghosts are definitely in their weakest state. Having forced a smile, Furz held Lamino's travels in one hand as she pointed with the other. I didn't notice it before, but the more I think about it, the more puzzled I become. About what? Zio also cast her gaze to the ancient abandoned castle that was covered by vines. Furz casually found an excuse. Tell me, who would build a castle in the middle of a forest? Furthermore, they didn't open up a trail to it. Before she finished her sentence, she really found the matter a little odd. Zio thought and said, Perhaps there was a trail, but after the castle was abandoned, whatever traces of it had been wiped out with time. Furz stroked the hair by her ear and shook her head. Then why would they abandon it? If they had considered safety back when building it, it would be more dangerous building it far from the town in an uninhabited castle. If it's just for vacations, with the way nobles do things, they wouldn't abandon it even if the maintenance and repairs are difficult. Zio blurted out, Could it be because it's haunted? Furz thought for a few seconds. Won't someone who can build such a huge castle hire Beyonders to deal with the ghosts? I suspect that the 3 churches and the kingdom's government don't know of this ancient castle. Otherwise, it doesn't make sense that they will leave the Beyonder ingredients inside. Upon saying that, she raised a possibility, an ancient castle of the sanguine. Such extraordinary creatures enjoyed living in places with few people. Furthermore, they were usually connected to dark forests and ancient castles. In addition, information about this ancient castle came from the sanguine to begin with. It's possible, Zio first agreed before disagreeing. Will the sanguine be afraid of ghosts? They definitely have the means to deal with the ancient wraiths inside. Makes sense. Don't tell me those sanguine don't like money and don't care about the search for Beyonder ingredients? Furz recalled Mr. Moon's behavior and denied her hypothesis. In deliberation, she said, Unless there's some problem that's not easy to resolve. That's what made the bigwigs choose to skirt around it. In that case, her operation would become more dangerous than she had anticipated. Zio tersely agreed. Let's do some preliminary investigations while the sun is still strong. All right. Furz held Lamino's travels and approached the half-collapsed ancient castle one step at a time. The two soon arrived at the entrance, which was 2/3 blocked by rocks. They discovered that, beneath the green vines, the stone walls were mottled and heavily weathered as though it had been in existence for a very, very long period of time. Zio wasn't in a rush to enter. Calling out to Furz, they circled around the castle slowly. When they returned to the entrance, she said in puzzlement, This castle style is purely defensive. It doesn't seem to consider the problems needed for living in it. Besides, many of the peculiarities of the building are ones I haven't heard of before. It has probably existed in the late 4th epoch or even earlier. What's there to defend again? Beast men? Trey ants? They've all gone extinct after the cataclysm. Haha, don't tell me that it's a building from the second or third epoch. Furs casually replied. She observed the terrain and left the entrance with Xiao before arriving at a relatively complete wall. She reached out her palm and pressed on it. Although she lacked combat experience, she was rather skilled when it came to the various aspects before a battle. An illusory light appeared in front of her, allowing Furs and Xiao to instantly enter the abandoned castle. The first thing that they saw was a collapsed staircase and layers of remnant concrete from above. There were rays of pure sunlight shining in from above, as well as masonry and rotten wood. There weren't any animal or bird feces or any green weeds on the ground. With a whoosh, the wind seeped into their bones, chilling them despite it being noon. Furs activated her spirit body and surveyed the area, but she failed to see any spirit bodies. However, she noticed that on the right of a remnant collapsed wall, there was a rather intact stone staircase. The staircase was mottled and scuffed as it extended downwards to an unknown location. Shall we head over there to take a look? Furs shot a glance at Xiao and made a suggestion. From her point of view, everything else in the castle could either be taken in at a glance or collapsed and stacked together. If they wished to do thorough investigations, it was certain that it would take a rather long amount of time. Therefore, it was better to gain a general understanding of the overall picture to assure themselves. Xiao glanced around and nodded gently. The cold wind is gathering underground. I suspect that all the wraiths and ghosts are hidden in the area where the staircase leads to. Yeah. Furs cautiously walked towards the mottled stone staircase and followed the steps, which were covered in gravel, down. The staircase was rather narrow, allowing only one person to pass at a time. Furthermore, they spiraled down, leaving Furs shaken. Tap, tap, tap. As their footsteps echoed into the distance, the light that shone inside the staircase darkened. Xiao lit the lantern in her hand as Furs opened Lamino's Travels, swiping a page with great familiarity. A bright and warm light burst out, illuminating the mottled stairs ahead of them. Tensed, Furs and Xiao walked down one level at a time. On the way, cold wind blew past them, making them overreact and nearly cause them to launch attacks at non-existent enemies. Tap, tap, tap. In the narrow and silent environment, Furs finally walked down the steps and stepped onto rather flat and solid ground. She had originally wanted to say, being in a place like this for too long will really make one go mad, but due to the silent and heavy atmosphere around her, she didn't make a sound. She was afraid that breaking the silence would result in extremely terrible developments. Using the blob of light that was floating above her, Furs cast her gaze forward in an attempt to see what was at the end of the staircase. It was a huge hall that was nearly 10 meters tall. There were black tiles laid on the ground with water droplets seeping out. There were signs of damage everywhere. Dozens of meters away, where the light nearly failed to illuminate the other end of the hall, there was a pair of double bronze doors sitting there silently. It went from the bottom to the top, and the rocks on the walls to its side had peeled off. The statues were in shambles, revealing the dark brown mud underneath. The surface of the door was engraved with dense symbols and strange patterns. They had a very mysterious and heavy feel, as though they were sealing something or blocking out something. Furs finally couldn't help but say with a hushed tone, "Have you seen such large doors before?" Beside her, Xiao shook her head. "No." Furs immediately drew a gasp. "Say, what could be behind that door? Where does it lead to? See, could it be the reason for building this castle in the first place? To prevent the creatures behind the door from coming out?" Xiao circled the area but didn't find any murals that could provide any information. All she found was that the closer she was to the bronze door, the more water seeped out from the ground. There were also more and more abandoned silver-black swords on the ground. During the 4th and 5th epoch, murals were very common in all castles and buildings. And before the cataclysm, it can be seen from various elvish ruins that supernatural creatures similarly like to use murals to praise their deities and to record their daily lives. Xiao said slowly, using her experience and knowledge from being a bounty hunter. Furs nodded slightly and said, "That's indeed the case. This ancient castle is more magical than I imagined." At this moment, she felt hesitant. She even had thoughts of leaving and seeking Mr. World's help. Having heard Little Sun describe so many horror stories when exploring abandoned ruins at the tarot gatherings, her mind couldn't help but wander when placed in a similar situation. She was scaring herself. Perhaps we can gather more clues by going closer. Xiao boldly took a few steps forward and approached the heavy sealed door that seemed to lead somewhere. Furs gripped Lamino's travels tightly and hurriedly chased after her. As she walked, she suddenly saw bright redness appear before her. What seeped out from the cracks of the black tiles was no longer water but staggering blood. This. Furs immediately flipped open the notebook with a bronze-green cover, and cast her sight on Xiao through the corner of her eye. It was unknown when Xiao had turned pale. Her eyes were dark green, and her lips were red. The area around her was dark and gloomy as her expression looked extremely distorted. Chapter 955 Ancient Wraith. Furz's pupils dilated as though she was trying to absorb more light into her eyes to better see Xiao's current circumstances. Meanwhile, the light in front of her suddenly exploded with a flash several times more blinding than old-school cameras, blanketing the surroundings with whiteness. Following that, her finger swiped on a page on Lamino's travels as black fog soared from her feet, enveloping her entire body. The thick black fog quickly transformed into palm-sized illusory bats as they flew in different directions of the underground hall. This was Wings of Darkness, which the moon had recorded in Lamino's travels. Its original use was to enhance one's speed and bestow temporary flight capabilities while producing a horde of blood-sucking bats to attack the enemy. However, Furs didn't use it for this purpose. Instead, she used it as a prop for her performance. After the illusory bats flew away, the space where Furs stood was already empty. At some point in time, she had appeared more than 10 meters away. After subconsciously escaping and defending herself, Furs could finally calm down as she hurriedly cast her gaze onto Xiao, who had turned abnormal. However, Xiao only appeared to have slightly disheveled blonde hair with malt-colored skin due to her continuous forays out in the sun. Besides looking somewhat blank as though she was surprised as to why her friend had such a huge reaction, she didn't show any signs of being influenced by wraiths or ghosts. Soraz, what happened? Xiao asked warily. Furs narrowed her eyes without directly replying to her. Flipping through Lamino's travels' pages, she asked, Xiao, how tall are you? Seemingly realizing something, Xiao answered, 152. Isn't that so? Just as she said that, Furz's fingers slid across the notebook's page, which was filled with symbols and magical labels. Silently, a holy light swirling with fire plummeted down from above. The unadulterated and bright light instantly enveloped Xiao before rippling outward with sunlight. As the blazing light stabbed into Furz's eyes, she saw the hall collapse and the surrounding space shatter like glass. This feeling was gone in a flash as Furs realized that she was still in her original spot. She had yet to flee. That was an illusion? She hurriedly turned to the side and saw Xiao looking at the damaged region of the heavy door. Furs deliberated for a moment and asked, Xiao, how tall are you? Xiao glanced at her and angrily said, Stop asking such inane questions. Phew, she's real. Furs heaved a sigh of relief as she quickly described her encounter to Xiao. After a few seconds of thought, Xiao used her lantern-wielding hand to nudge Furz's arm. Let's retreat. Perhaps the closer we are to that door, the easier it is to hallucinate. Yes, that's possible. Furs nodded in agreement as she quickly moved back a few steps. Following that, she surveyed the area and asked in puzzlement, Why can't we find any wraiths or ghosts here? Such an environment should be something that they enjoy. Xiao was perplexed as well. She then did a careful observation before landing her gaze on the blob of sunlight floating above Furz's head. Try extinguishing it, she suggested. Furs came to a realization as she immediately dispelled the light. Silent darkness blanketed the area and ruled the underground hall once more. Only the lantern's faint yellow light put up a resistance against all of this. Then, Furs saw two figures in her spirit vision. They were rather close to the bronze door. One was a female with coiled hair, wearing a knight's trousers and a garish shirt for ease of movement. The other was a man wearing silver-black armor as he held a sword that was almost snapping due to rust. The former's face was a blur as it kept wandering between the door and where Furs and Xiao arrived. The latter was loitering beside the door, muttering something. These are the two ancient wraiths? Furs nudged Xiao and said with a suppressed voice, I see spirit bodies. I see them as well. They aren't hiding at all. Xiao curved her back as she readied herself for a fight. Furs hurriedly nudged her. Don't be hasty. We aren't sure that they're the targets. She attempted to take 3 steps forward, but the two relatively blurry figures didn't even look at her.
First thought and suddenly said, "Ma'am, what are you doing?"
She had heard of stories in other mysticism circles that wraiths, shadows, and other higher-level spirit body creatures could be communicated with. However, she regretted it the moment she said that. This was because communication didn't allow her to achieve her goal. There was no way she could persuade the other party to kill themselves and hand over the cursed item and remnant spirituality of an ancient wraith. Just as Furs was considering if she should launch a direct attack, the lady in the garish shirt and knight's trousers replied with a flat tone, "I'm searching for my husband. He's a god here. Communication is really possible."
Furs pressed out of curiosity. "Where did he go?"
At this moment, Zio approached as she wore a look of extreme vigilance. The blurry-figured lady answered blankly, "He's a god here. He told me that magical power seeps out from behind the door, corrupting his teammates. He got me to leave as quickly as possible with a messenger. He said that he would ensure that I escaped safely, but I don't wish for that. I want to leave with him." After sending off the messenger, I returned midway and returned underground. But I can't find him. With the age of this castle exceeding the present epoch, the last defender has definitely transformed into an ancient wraith. This lady's story has moved me. I really can't bear to attack her. Furz's mind whirled as she carefully took a few steps and circled around the ancient female wraith and approached the bronze door. This time, she and Zio didn't suffer any more hallucinations. This seemed to imply that her encounter was subconsciously created by the lady.
A distance from the silver-black armored knight with a rusty sword, Furs attempted to ask, "Sir, what are you doing?"
The knight paused and said with a humming voice, "I'm guarding this door of blackness. I need to ensure that my wife has escaped safely. If you meet her, tell her that her knight will fight for her to the very last moment." Door of blackness. It's clearly a bronze door. Wait, what did he say? He said that he's guarding the door to ensure that his wife can safely escape? Isn't this the other half of that woman's story which she described? This is her husband? Furs was taken aback as she kept looking back and forth between the two ancient wraiths.
The lady wearing a garish shirt and knight's trousers slowly approached the bronze door before returning to the middle of the hall repeatedly. As for the silver-black armored man, he was patrolling about the door with a rotting sword in hand.
At times, they would pass by without noticing each other. Such a scene must have gone on for at least 1,500 years, or even longer. Furs commented silently as she turned to glance at Zio. She realized that her friend's eyes were already welling with tears. What an easily touched person. Furs couldn't help it as she shouted at the female wraith, "Look at the door. Your husband has been there all along." The lady slowed down her pace and first glanced at Furs before casting her gaze at the heavy door. Her blank gaze penetrated the night, landing behind him. "Why can't I find him?" The wraith repeated her words and repeated her actions. Furs felt an inexplicable sense of sorrow, and just as she was about to shout again, she saw the knight turn to look at her and Zio. He shouted, "Who are you?" Just as he said that, the female wraith cast her gaze at Zio and Furs again. Furs immediately felt her thoughts slow down as a coldness quickly formed inside her body and rippled out, freezing her flesh and joints. As for Zio, she too was suffering from the same condition. The area around the lantern dimmed significantly. At this moment, 2 bolts of lightning lit up in Zio's eyes. This made the wraith let out a painful cry as his body turned faint. Zio instantly escaped from her frozen state and threw out the triangular blade in her hand towards the female wraith. Bolts of illusory lightning swirled around the triangular blade's tip, stabbing straight into the lady. Psychic lashing. The female wraith screamed as her body turned faint. Furs instantly snapped awake as she slid her fingers across the open Lamino's travels. Life seemed to immediately gather from the surrounding shadows, turning into a pitch-black chain that restrained the male wraith to the ground, sealing off his mouth. Abyss chains. Meanwhile, Zio rushed out, and with an illusory brand in hand, she stamped it on the female wraith. With her holding back the female wraith, Furz's actions became more composed. She flipped through Lamino's travels and slid her fingers. Silver lightning that branched out and blasted out of thin air, smiting the male wraith and turning the area into a lightning hellscape. Finally, a holy pillar of light that had flames swirling around it appeared. It enveloped the male wraith and completely purified him. With one enemy taken down, Furs immediately turned and dealt with the female wraith with Zio. She didn't hold back on using powers from Lamino's travels. She came up with wise combinations of them, and using Zio's suppression, she switched between restrainment powers and offense from time to time. Soon, they finished off their target.
Everything fell silent as Furs heaved a sigh of relief. She then looked at the battlefield with a look of disbelief. Is that it?
She originally imagined that two ancient wraiths had unique powers, and with their higher levels, they weren't something Subsequence 5 Beyonders could deal with. However, she realized that everything happened rather smoothly. This made her truly realize how godly Lamino's travels was. She also began looking forward to the next sequence as a scribe. Zio was somewhat astonished as she thought for a few seconds. It's no wonder someone told me that, beneath the level of demigods, the number of Beyonders, their cooperation, and usage of powers are more important than the sequence. Just as she said that, she heard knocking sounds resonate.
It broke the silence of the hall, and it came from behind the bronze door.
Chapter 956. The things behind the door. Bang. 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 Behind the bronze door, the slamming sounds continued incessantly, echoing throughout the vast underground hall as though they came from an abnormally distant past. Furs clamped up and couldn't help but tremble. Unable to help it, she suppressed her voice. What could be behind the door?
I've no idea.
Zio honestly shook her head, subconsciously gulping. Her right hand, which had just picked up her triangular blade, had her joints protruding out as her blood vessels surfaced. Clearly, she was gripping the triangular blade tightly. Bang, bang, bang. The slamming sounds continued without any change in frequency. Each sound seemed to strike at Furs's and Zio's hearts, leaving their hair standing and scalps tingling. It likely won't be able to come out, right? If it could so easily come out, it wouldn't have waited until today. Furs tried to console herself with parched lips.
Zio nodded heavily and said, "We leave once the ingredients form."
In such an environment and atmosphere, her curiosity had been completely overwhelmed by her innate fear. All right. As Furs glanced at the spots where the two ancient wraiths had been cleansed, she blamed the moon for providing undetailed information. He hadn't mentioned that there was such a strange door beneath the ancient castle. At this moment, glowing dust was landing on the ground like shattered gems, forming into two piles as they gathered together. Around them, nearly formless remnant spirituality condensed into a seemingly ethereal crystal. Accompanied by the crystals and dust were two different items. One was ring-shaped and completely transparent as though it was a corroded ring. The other was an eye carved from crystal, with faint black gas swirling within. Upon seeing this scene, Furs suddenly realized something. An ancient wraith was a ghost-like creature with a Beyonder characteristic mixed in. The cursed item would be related to a particular item while they were still alive, fusing with the characteristic and turning into a foundation to which they relied on for their existence. It was precisely because of this that different ancient wraiths had different corresponding cursed items in shape and form. However, they were essentially the same. And the dust was another type of characteristic. It was the source of most of their strength, stemming from remnant spirituality, slightly equivalent to the blood and ingredients of monsters. Bang, bang, bang. The entity striking behind the bronze door didn't let up at all. It kept testing Furs's and Zio's psyche. Being afraid and cautious, the duo's bodies trembled so much that they even imagined that the door was shaking slightly. Their racing hearts were in their throats. With them being able to head for the staircase at any moment, Furs finally waited until the ancient wraith's powder and cursed items took form. As she signaled to Zio to be wary, she crouched down and took out 3 square metal boxes she had prepared. After some hesitation, Furs looked up at Zio and said, "These two ancient wraiths have been waiting for each other for so long. I am thinking of separating a little of what they left behind and burying them together. In that case, I'll get a cursed item, and you'll get a pile of dust. We'll split the remaining spirituality, all right?" Zio didn't hesitate as she nodded. "All right." Furs silently heaved a sigh of relief as she pursed her lips. Flipping through Lamino's travels, she slid her finger across a particular page. The 5 nails on her right hand immediately grew long and sharp, covering black patterns and symbols. This was the claw of corrosion from the sanguine. Upon seeing her palm transform, Furs grabbed at the ground, easily digging a hole and leaving behind a corrosive mark. Right on the heels of that, she placed the crystal eyeball-like cursed item and a pile of dust into the hole before filling the hole with the gravel and soil she had dug up. She lightly grazed the flattened ground with her fingernails, writing an epitaph. Returning for you, defending for you, together forever.
After doing all of this, Furs sighed when she heard the slamming behind the bronze turn louder. Bam!
She jumped in fright and hurriedly placed the pile of dust, ring-shaped curse item, and remnant spirituality into the different square metal boxes. Then, she put the boxes away, stood up, and slowly walked to the spiraling and cramped staircase with Zio.
Bang! Bang! Bang!
The slamming sounds behind the bronze door grew intense as Furs and Zio subconsciously gritted their teeth, following the staircase and rapidly heading up. They increased their speed until they began running. They ignored the possibility of falling on the staircase and tumbling down like a wheel. Finally, Furs and Zio saw sunlight. Sunlight beamed in from outside, shining upon the staircase ahead of them. It was bright, pure and warm. At this moment, the slamming sounds from underground had come to a sudden stop without any follow-up. Furs and Zio exchanged looks, slowed down their pace, and after a few large strides, returned to the top of the abandoned ancient castle. The duo didn't say a word and directly left the area, returning to the periphery of the forest. After walking for some time, Furs calmed down and pursed her lips. It was really terrifying. Although the thing behind the bronze door didn't deal any harm to us, nor did it even show itself, I think it was more terrifying than the ancient wraiths. Compared to all my past experiences, it's far more terrifying. In those few minutes, I couldn't help but imagine all the different tragic deaths I might suffer. Each one was more terrifying than the last, but none of them were as terrifying as the slamming sounds. Zio turned her head and agreed with a nod. Yeah. I felt as though I was walking on the edge of a cliff. Furs was about to continue when she saw two streams of bright red blood flowing down Zio's nose. Zio, your nose is bleeding. Furs hurriedly warned her friend. Zio was taken aback as her pupils dilated. You too. Furs blankly reached out her hand and wiped her nose. It felt warm to the touch, wet and sticky. She was appalled as she hurriedly held her right hand in front of her and saw red blood smeared across it. It was bright and striking. A result from being overly anxious? Furs muttered in puzzlement. At this moment, through the sunlight diffusing through the forest's canopy, she realized that faint black spots were quickly growing on her wrists at a discernible pace. The black spots rapidly spread, covering her arms and the back of her hands. Furs subconsciously cried out as she hurriedly looked at Zio. She saw Zio's cheeks and neck covered with black spots.
This isn't normal.
Furs blurted out. Zio sensed the abnormality happening to the both of them as she recalled and said, "Do you still remember what that female wraith said?"
She said that the guards from before had been corrupted by the forces that seeped out from behind the bronze door.
Could it be that we've been corrupted? Furs was taken aback for a second before she nodded heavily. It's possible. She hurriedly took out the medicine that she had prepared, handing over some of it to Zio. Then, she twisted the lid off and downed 2 bottles. However, they didn't show any signs of recovering. The black spots grew in number, turning their vision blurry. Badump! Badump! Before long, Furs, whose efforts to save herself were in vain, could hear her heartbeat and sense her body beginning to lose strength. Out of ideas, she quivered her lips, clenched her teeth, and turned her body around. She took a few steps to open up a distance from Zio. Then, she bowed her head and chanted Mr. Fool's honorific name. In about 10 seconds, she saw dark red light appear, engulfing her like the tide.
The ravings and roaring vanished and Furs saw the familiar mottled table and the 10 high-backed chairs opposite her.
She then realized that her dizziness and blurred vision had vanished. There weren't any more of the strange accentuated black spots on her spirit body. Thank you for your help.
Furs hurriedly stood up and bowed at the figure shrouded in grey fog at the end of the long bronze table. Then, she heard Mr. Fool say in a calm tone, "Your spirit had been corrupted by some force.
It should be fine now." Cleansed by Mr. Fool? Furz's heart stirred. Just as she wanted to make a request to Mr. Fool regarding how Zio could be saved, the scene before turned red as light soared up. After a brief pause, she found herself in the real world, back in Delaire Forest. The black spots on the back of her hands and wrists were rapidly fading and receding. The blood that kept dripping from her nose had already come to a stop. Returning to her body, she saw Zio weakly slumped on a tree. Her face was covered in black spots, making her look terrifying. The muscles on both sides of her neck were tensed up as her mind spun. A few seconds later she walked over quickly, pressed Zio on the shoulders and rapidly said, "I have a way to save you, but you need to follow my instructions. Use ancient Hermes to say this, the fool that doesn't belong to this era." Zio could hardly turn her swollen eyelids.
Looking at Furs for 2 seconds, she heavily chanted, "The fool that doesn't belong to this era.
The mysterious ruler above the gray fog. The king of yellow and black who wields good luck." Just as she said that, Zio saw dark red starlight surge out from the void, sweeping over her. Indescribable roars continued for a second before vanishing from Zio's ears. She then saw herself seated in an ancient and majestic palace. She was sitting beside a mottled, bronze table. At her feet was a boundless grayish-white fog.
In front of her was a lofty figure looking down upon her.
This scene was both unfamiliar and familiar to her. She had once seen it in a dream, but she hadn't ever had it again after the exorcism ritual. That purification was actually useless.
Zio suddenly had this thought as she stood up in deliberation, bowing at the figure enshrouded in gray fog.
"You are the great king of yellow and black?" She didn't appear too surprised or alarmed, as though she had already expected it. "You can call me Mr. Fool."
"Have a seat," the figure with an epic aura replied calmly.
Zio bowed again and sat down, confirming that she had escaped her unwell state.
She looked to her sides and thought before asking, "Honorable Mr. Fool, does Furs Wall have a seat here?" Shrouded in the gray fog, the fool nodded gently and said, "Yes."
Zio fell silent for a second and directly asked, "Can I join just like her?" The fool chuckled. "It's a gathering they organized on their own accord but is convened by me. There's still a seat available at present. You may join. Draw a card." They use one of the major arcana cards as their codename. Zio didn't ask or speak further. She immediately nodded.
"Yes, Mr. Fool."
On the bronze table in front of her, a deck of tarot cards immediately appeared. Zio reached out her right hand and solemnly cut the deck, pulled out one card, and flipped it over. Her card depicted an angel with a trumpet and the sleeping dead awaiting salvation, the Judgment card. Chapter 957. Getting to know each other. Looking at the Judgment card in hand, Zio was taken aback. "This greatly meets my expectations." Shrouded in the gray fog, the fool nodded and calmly said, "The gathering is held here at 3 in the afternoon on Mondays, Baklan time. Be prepared. During the gathering, you can exchange information, ingredients, formulas, and knowledge. You can also pay a certain price to entrust missions to the other members." Zio recalled for a moment before nodding in enlightenment.
"Yes, Mr. Fool." Believing that this was all for the day, she heard the voice coming from the end of the bronze table.
"What did you do before being corrupted by that force?" "We really were corrupted." Zio composed herself and completely recounted her exploration of the ancient castle with Furs. She emphasized the bronze door which had been named the Door of Blackness, as well as the ancient castle's guard that had been reduced to a wraith due to the corruption. Then, she noticed Mr. Fool nod slightly as he said calmly, "Don't enter that ancient castle again before you reach sequence 4. It's time for you to return." Zio then got up, and following the descriptions in the religious rituals, she bowed and said, "Your wish is my wish." Just as she said that, the dark red color surged in front of her. After everything dissipated, she was back in the real world and leaning against a thick tree. Subconsciously looking at the back of her hand, she realized that the black spots were rapidly turning faint. Zio looked up at Furs, who was staring at her worriedly. As their gazes met, Furs was first delighted before revealing a smile. She opened her mouth but was at a loss for words. Zio slowly exhaled and pointed ahead. "Let's first return to the town." "All right," Furs answered without any hesitation. At this moment above the gray fog, the fool Klein was tapping on the edge of the mottled table as he considered Miss Magician and Miss Judgment's encounter. The object or power sealed behind the Door of Blackness could still corrupt the guards and explorers outside, even without escaping. Just the mere thought of it was terrifying. Furthermore, this corruption stemmed from the spirit body. To resolve it, Klein had only 2 solutions. One was to make the corrupted entity hold a complete secret deed ritual as he used the powers above the gray fog and the sun brooch to complete a purification. The other was to directly pull the spirit body over, using the gray fog to cleanse them. As he didn't have the luxury of time, he had chosen the latter. What could it be? The most corruptive power belongs to the devil pathway. That place connects to the abyss? That's not impossible. Based on Little Sun's description, during the early and mid stages of the second epoch, devils often left the abyss and were active over the land. It was only when the ancient sun god appeared, causing ancient gods to perish one after another, did they retreat into the abyss and seal themselves in. Based on that, it's rather normal to have an underground ancient entrance in the northern continent to lead to the abyss. It can also be imagined that a castle is built with men sent to watch over it. But the problem lies in the fact that it's been millennia. Why would there still be an existence slamming the door? Are the devils planning on returning? Klein made a preliminary guess. He temporarily had no plans on exploring the abandoned castle to verify his thoughts, because it was unlikely that there would be any changes anytime soon. After all, since it was news that came from the Sanguine, he could get the Moon Emlyn to do some gathering of information to figure out the history of the castle. Reigning in this thought, Klein removed the topaz chain from his wrist and divined if the matter regarding the ancient castle was pressing. He received a negative answer. He immediately returned to the real world and waited for the local ruler, General May Sanchez, to send over the down payment. At 2 in the afternoon, Faina Pottertime, Haggis, with his hair combed backward while dressed as a Northern Continent gentleman, carried a black leather suitcase with a team of guards as he knocked on Dwayne Dantes' door. "Please come on in." A warm and elegant voice sounded from the inside. It was first Loanese in a Backland accent before it was changed to the local language of Dutanese. Haggis turned the doorknob and entered. He saw Dwayne Dantes with his white sideburns and deep blue eyes stand up from his reclining chair while pressing down the ends of his black vest. "Good afternoon, my friend." This lone gentleman with good looks and bearings took 2 steps forward and extended his right palm. This time, he switched to using Loanese. Haggis replied using the accent of a Loanese noble, "It's my honor to be your friend." After he shook hands with Dwayne Dantes, he surveyed the area and chuckled. "Is this your servant?" He pointed at a mixed-blood youth standing behind the arms dealer. In between the lines, he was asking if he was trustworthy. After all, Dwayne Dantes hadn't brought any servants back when he visited the general's residence yesterday. Yes, his greatest strength is the ability to keep secrets. Dwayne Dantes smiled as he pointed to the leather sofa across the reclining chair. With 2 guards following Haggis, he closed the door and sat down. He then said with a smile, "I've heard of an Intis proverb that's said to be from Emperor Roselle. He said that dead men tell no tales." Dwayne Dantes said with a laugh. "Emperor Roselle also said something else. Corpses can speak." "Is that so? This is my first time hearing of this." Haggis enjoyed conversing with a Northern Continent gentleman, so they continued their conversation for a while before he lifted up the leather suitcase beside him and opened it. At that instant, there seemed to be overflowing golden lusters. Under the illumination from the sunlight outside, the entire room seemed to brighten significantly. Haggis then looked at Dwayne Dantes and said, 5,000 lone gold pounds, as well as 5,000 gold coins and gold bars. This is the down payment. I'll bring along the remaining 30,000 pounds in cash and gold the entire time, and we'll hand it over when the arms deal is completed." Dwayne Dantes scanned the stacks of cash, the gold coins, and gold bars in the leather suitcase before retracting his gaze and saying with a smile, "When do we set off?" Haggis closed the leather suitcase and handed it to Dwayne Dantes' servant and said simply, "Tomorrow morning." He paused for 2 seconds before saying, "Mr. Dantes, the general has a guest who would like to meet you." Dwayne Dantes' expression didn't change as he fell silent for a few seconds. "When?" "Now," Haggis said without daring to show any signs of being perfunctory. "He's downstairs." Dwayne Dantes nodded slightly. "Please invite him up." Haggis immediately heaved a sigh of relief and left with his guards. They followed the stairwell down. Before long, Luca, in a simple white robe with brass lines adorning it, walked up. His silver hair had been combed very neatly. When he arrived by Dwayne Dantes' door, he heard a voice from the inside just as he raised his hand. "Please come in." This time they spoke using ancient Faceac. Luca's expression didn't change as he naturally pushed open the door. He then saw the middle-aged gentleman who had rather good looks and qualities from yesterday standing beside a reclining chair facing him. And sitting on the reclining chair was a young man. He had black hair and brown eyes, with a thin, cut face. He had a cold temperament. Luca was taken aback as he took a step forward, entered the room and closed the door. After he sat down on the sofa in a composed manner,
His gray-green eyes clearly reflected the young man in front of him.
Gehrman Sparrow? Luca addressed him with a rhetorical question.
Gehrman Sparrow curled the corners of his mouth.
Directly addressing others by their full name is impolite. Luca nodded and said, "My apologies for my faux pas. I recall that you advanced to sequence 5 less than half a year ago, or it might have only been 3 months. Yes, it should have been completed when you were in the ruins of the battlefield of gods. I never expected that you were already a demigod. It left me a little bewildered." Gehrman Sparrow smiled without giving any explanations.
After a brief moment of silence, he said in an unhurried tone, "Why are you visiting me?"
Luca calmly replied,
"I don't know." The atmosphere in the room suddenly turned somewhat odd.
Gehrman Sparrow seemed to forget that there was an elderly man sitting opposite him that needed him to speak again.
Luca indiscernibly nodded and said, "This is the thing. I made a prophecy by chance not too long ago.
In that prophecy, I will be in a rather thorny situation in the future. And one of the people I met with over these few days will help me deal with it. I'm not sure if it's you, but I'd rather be safe than sorry. So I decided to meet you and get to know each other. My name is Luca Brewster, a clergyman who serves the God of knowledge and wisdom.
I'm presently in charge of various matters in West Balam."
Gehrman Sparrow nodded and said,
"Not bad.
I now know you. I don't believe I need to introduce myself, right?"
"Of course," Luca thought and said. "You should be a bizarro sorcerer.
I recently received some intel that there has been some reshuffling among the secret order in Intis." He didn't see Gehrman Sparrow reveal any looks of shock. This powerful adventurer, who was famous across the 5 seas, said after a moment of silence, "Zeratul has returned." The look in Luca's eyes changed immediately before being restored to normal. Then, he stood up and nodded. "Since we've gotten to know each other, it's time we bid farewell." After saying this, he walked to the door, twisted the doorknob, and left the room. Sitting on the reclining chair, Gehrman Sparrow watched as his figure was concealed inch by the wooden door until he completely disappeared. Then he chuckled.
"What a charlatan."
"Yes." Dwayne Dantes, who was standing beside the reclining chair, found a seat and sat down. Then, he picked up a cup of tea and sipped from it. With white sideburns and deep blue eyes, he and the thin, angular-faced Gehrman Sparrow exchanged looks and smiled in unison. On Monday afternoon, Dwayne Dantes took out his golden pocket watch, opened it, and said to Haggis opposite him, "We're almost arriving at our destination. I believe you and your men need some rest." "An excellent suggestion." Haggis was rather agreeable. Dwayne Dantes pointed at the street ahead. "There's a hotel ahead. Let's rest there for half a day before we set off again tomorrow." Haggis didn't object to it as he turned to the front and instructed the carriage driver. After checking into the hotel, Dwayne Dantes declined Haggis's invitation for afternoon tea by using an afternoon nap as an excuse. Slightly more than half an hour later, above the boundless gray fog, Klein sat in the seat belonging to the fool. You're tuning in to the Xiaofan's Wuxia Tales YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.